You were 23 years old, working a night shift at a mid-tier cybersecurity firm in Tallinn, Estonia, running penetration tests on banking infrastructure that nobody important will ever read. The work is methodical, almost tedious. You find the same class of vulnerabilities in the same categories of systems, write them up in the same report templates, collect the same salary that keeps the lights on in your one-bedroom apartment. You are good at this. You are very good at this. But good in this industry is invisible. Then, one Tuesday in November, at 2:14 inches the morning, you find something that is not supposed to exist. It's buried inside a routine audit of a mid-sized Baltic financial clearinghouse, a secondary authentication pathway, masked beneath 3 layers of obfuscated legacy code that routes a small percentage of wire transfers through an intermediary node in Cyprus before they complete. Not a bug, not an accident. Someone built this deliberately, and built it well enough that it has been operational for at least 4 years without triggering a single compliance flag. You sit with it for 6 minutes, following the trail manually, and when you realize what you're looking at, your hands stop moving on the keyboard. The node in Cyprus connects to a shell architecture you recognize from a threat intelligence briefing you weren't supposed to have access to, one you pulled from a restricted internal partition 8 months ago purely out of curiosity. The architecture was flagged by NATO's cybersecurity division as a component of a sanctions evasion network linked to a state-level actor. You are looking at the edge of something enormous, and you are doing it on a corporate laptop with your real name attached to the session log. You close the audit report without documenting the finding. You go home. You don't sleep. By Thursday, you have rebuilt the same discovery on an air-gapped machine using hardware you bought secondhand for cash from 3 different vendors. You are not yet certain what you are going to do with what you know, but you understand instinctively that the moment you tell anyone at the firm, you lose control of the information entirely. And control, you have learned, is the only currency that matters in the space between knowing something and surviving that knowledge. You resign the following Monday, citing personal reasons. What happens next takes 2 years, and by the end of those 2 years, 7 intelligence agencies across 4 continents will have open files with your codename at the top. You don't set out to become a threat. That is the first thing people misunderstand about how someone ends up where you are. You set out to understand the system you accidentally touched, because understanding it is the only way to know whether it can touch you back. You pull on threads. Each thread connects to another. The Cyprus node is one piece of a financial routing architecture that spans 43 shell companies across 11 jurisdictions, processing an estimated $2.3 billion annually in transactions that officially don't exist. The state-level actor behind it isn't one country. It's a consortium of interests, some governmental, some private, bound together by the shared need to move money that cannot be moved through legitimate channels. You don't publish this. You don't sell it. You document it with the obsessive precision of someone who knows that accuracy is the only protection they have. Then, 9 months into your investigation, someone finds you first. It comes through a message on a forum you assumed was private, written in a cipher that uses a key you created yourself and shared with exactly no one. The message is 4 words. We know you're looking. There is no threat attached. There is no demand. Just the 4 words, and the implicit understanding that whoever sent them penetrated your operational security so cleanly that they chose to announce it rather than exploit it, which means they want something from you, not your silence. You disappear within 48 hours. A new identity, a new city, a new architecture of devices and connections that you have been building as a contingency since the beginning. You move to a city where you have no prior connections, rent a room with cash under a name that doesn't belong to you, and spend the next 3 weeks rebuilding your operational environment from scratch while tracing how the message was sent. It takes you 3 weeks to find them. It takes them, you will later learn, less than 4 hours to find you again. They simply wait for you to make contact because they know you will. The man on the other end of the encrypted channel identifies himself only as a contractor. He works, he says, for interests that are not governments but are adjacent to them. He tells you that the financial network you've been mapping is protected at levels you don't yet understand, and that 2 separate intelligence services have already flagged anomalous research activity that matches your pattern of inquiry. He is not warning you away. He is offering you something. Deeper access in exchange for what you've already built. He tells you that your documentation is the most complete independent mapping of the network that exists outside of classified systems. You ask him who benefits from deeper access. He tells you that question is above his pay grade. You tell him you'll think about it. You spend 2 days building a forensic profile of everyone who could have sent that message and narrowing it to a list of 11 individuals. Then you take everything you have, encrypt it to a key only you hold, and upload it to a server architecture, distributed across 6 countries with automated deadman logic that will release the full documentation to 43 journalists and 3 human rights organizations if you don't. Reset the timer every 72 hours. Then you go back to the contractor and tell him you're in. This is the decision that changes everything. Not because it puts you in danger you were already in danger, but because it transforms you from someone who knows something into someone who does something with what they know. There is a difference between those 2 people that cannot be undone. The first thing you learn operating in the space between intelligence services and criminal infrastructure is that the line between them is not a line. It is a negotiated boundary that moves constantly based on who needs what from whom at any given moment. The contractor feeds you access to internal communications from 2 of the shell companies in the network. You use them to map 3 additional layers of the architecture that weren't visible from the outside. You give him back a cleaned analysis with the deadman server addresses redacted. He gives you a name, a compliance officer at a Swiss private bank who has been documenting irregularities for 18 months and is now missing. You find the compliance officer alive in a rented apartment in Porto, running out of money and too frightened to contact anyone she knew before she disappeared. You don't meet her in person. You make contact through a chain of intermediaries, establish that her documentation corroborates yours on 6 critical points, and help her build a secure channel to a journalist at a publication with a legal infrastructure to protect her. You do not give her your name. You do not give her the contractor's name. You give her exactly what she needs to be safe and nothing more. This is the second thing you learn. Information is not power by itself. The architecture around information, who holds it, who can use it, what conditions govern its release, is the actual power. You are not a hacker, in a sense that the word implies destruction or chaos. You are a builder of information architecture that functions under adversarial conditions. The difference is important, and it is the reason you are still alive. The contractor disappears 6 weeks after the Swiss banker story breaks internationally. You assume he is either dead or has been absorbed into a more controlled environment by whichever service was running him. The money stops. The access stops. You are, once again, alone with what you know and the growing attention of people who want to contain it. By now, the open file with your codename exists in 3 places: the NSA's Tailored Access Operations Division, which flagged your server architecture after the journalist's publication triggered a cross-reference with your existing monitoring of the network, the FSB, which connected your investigation to the Cypress node through a different intelligence chain, and a private threat intelligence firm contracted by one of the shell company principals, which is the most dangerous of the three because it operates without legal constraints. You know about the first two because you have access to enough secondary sources to triangulate the attention. You learn about the third when they make their first move, which is not subtle. Two men attempt to follow you from a train station in a city you have been in for less than 12 hours. You notice because you are always watching, and because one of them made the amateur mistake of looking at you directly twice in 4 minutes. You leave through a service exit, abandon the burner phone you used to arrange arrival logistics, and spend the next 6 hours moving in patterns designed to identify surveillance rather than evade it. By the end of those 6 hours, you have confirmed 2 additional individuals operating in a loose box formation around what they believe is your route. You are not on that route. You mapped it as a decoy 40 minutes after you spotted the first tail. You are already 3 kilometers away, in a cafe with public Wi-Fi that you are not using, watching the decoy route's traffic cameras through a compromised municipal system, documenting faces. The private firm is run by a former intelligence officer from a service you won't name in any of your documentation because naming it would narrow the list of people who could identify you. You know his name. You have known it for 4 months. You have not used it because using it would signal your awareness, and your awareness is worth more as a hidden asset than as a display of capability. This is the calculus you run continuously now. Every piece of information is simultaneously a tool and a liability. Using it changes the environment. Not using it preserves optionality. You are always calculating the difference. 18 months after the contractor disappeared, you receive a different kind of contact. Not through the underworld channels you've been operating in, but through a dead drop you established years ago and have never used a method so old-fashioned that only someone with access to your earliest operational documentation would know it existed. The contact is a woman who identifies herself as working for an oversight committee within a Western intelligence service that she does not name. She is not there to arrest you or recruit you. She tells you something that reorients every assumption you have been operating under. The network you've been mapping for 3 years is the subject of a parallel classified investigation that has been running for 5 years. And your external documentation has surfaced in their analysis because it contains intelligence they do not have. Specifically, you identified 2 principles in the network that the classified investigation missed because you approached the mapping from the financial architecture rather than from known individual associations. You found people they didn't find. She wants to know how. You spend 3 days deciding whether to meet her again. The decision is not about trust you don't trust her. It's about whether the information exchange she is proposing changes your risk profile in a net positive or negative direction. You run the calculation and decide that an intelligence service actively investigating the network is a more useful counterparty than a vacuum. You meet her again. What she gives you in exchange for your methodology is a piece of information that has significant personal consequences. Your real name has been connected to your codename by the private threat intelligence firm, and they passed it to one of the network's principals 4 months ago. You have been operating under the assumption that your identity was protected. It was not. It hasn't been for 4 months. The reason you're still alive, she tells you, is that the principal chose to monitor rather than move against you. presumably to let you continue surfacing information that might expose their competitors within the network before eliminating you. You are being used. You have been being used. And the people using you are now deciding whether you've exhausted your utility. You process this information on the walk back to wherever you are staying. You do not go back to where you are staying. You walk for 2 hours, running the entire architecture of your current operational posture through a systematic vulnerability analysis, identifying every point at which your identity exposure creates risk. By the time you stop walking, you have a list of 17 changes to make in the next 48 hours, and a clear understanding that the situation you are in cannot be navigated back to safety through incremental adjustment. The exposure is structural. Fixing it requires rebuilding. But you also understand something else, something that has been forming slowly over 3 years of operating in the space between what governments know and what they acknowledge, between what criminals hide and what investigators find. The dead man server is still running. The timer resets every 72 hours. 43 journalists and 3 human rights organizations are still on the release list. The documentation is still the most complete independent mapping of the network that exists, and you have added to it continuously. It is worth something now that it wasn't worth when you were a night shift auditor in Tallinn wondering why anyone would build a hidden payment pathway into clearinghouse infrastructure. You are not safe. You have not been safe for a long time, and the honest version of your situation is that safety is probably no longer a realistic goal. The question is not how to become safe. The question is what you do with what you know before the window closes, and how you build the conditions that make the window closing as costly as possible for everyone who would benefit from it. You find a new room. You build a new environment. You change every contact method, every device, every protocol. The 17-item list gets done in 31 hours. Then you open the documentation archive and start working on the 2 principles the classified investigation missed. If someone is going to use you as a tool to surface information, the least you can do is decide which information gets surfaced and when. The timer resets. 72 hours. You keep working. 3 months later, one of the 2 missing principles appears in a financial disclosure connected to a prosecution in a jurisdiction you did not anticipate. You don't know whether that came from your documentation, from the oversight committee, from the journalist's ongoing reporting, or from some combination of all 3. You probably will never know. The network is too complex for clean causality. Actions propagate in ways that aren't traceable back to origins, which is the same reason it took 5 years of classified investigation and 3 years of your work to map it this far, and the same reason it is not mapped yet. There are still principles unaccounted for. There is still money moving through architectures you haven't fully reverse engineered. There are still people in rooms with real names and clean reputations making decisions that result in the kind of thing you found in a Baltic clearinghouse audit at 2 a.m. years ago on a corporate laptop, before you understood what it meant to know something that powerful people need you not to know. The file with your codename is now open in at least 7 agencies. You know this with reasonable confidence because 3 of them have made contact in various forms over the past 18 months, and the others you have inferred from the pattern of probes against your infrastructure. Some of them want you contained. Some of them want you working for them. At least one of them, you believe, would accept your death as an adequate resolution. You reset the timer. You keep working. The situation does not resolve. It escalates, compounds, and continues, the way all consequential things do, in the space between a decision and its full consequences, which is where you live now, permanently, in the present tense, with 72 hours always counting down.